Welcome to this lesson on vision document. In this session, we are going to go through each important part of the vision document, starting with an overview of the document itself. Then, we start by defining the ultimate goal and target users, also called personas. Then, we will discuss the business processes involved, the creation of the mockups and solution architecture. Finally, we will discuss the epics and user stories. The vision document is prepared during the initiation phase and it is a very important part of the project. It is a means of presenting the customer expectations. It is also where we lay out a solid path for project adoption and define a plan to fulfill that vision, while providing an amazing digital experience. The vision document has a very clear structure with 6 important parts. The ultimate goal and project drivers, users definition, business process, mockups, architecture, and the epics and user stories. It will work as a guide for the initiation phase. At the end of it, the goal is to fill out each section of the vision document, together with the customer, as one team. At the end of the week, the vision document is delivered and will serve as a living document, to guide the project delivery and ensure alignment at all times. So, let's go through all these parts in more detail. An ultimate goal is a statement that defines the problem we want to solve, or the goal we want to achieve. Where possible, it should be devoid of the solution. Defining ultimate goals is a thorough process that should be taken very seriously in any OutSystems project. It is really important to invest time in understanding and defining the ultimate goals, to be able to deliver apps that the users will love and that the business needs. For instance, the ultimate goal of this lesson is to demonstrate the several sections of the vision document and explain why they are important to guide any OutSystems project. The ultimate goal is part of the project vision and will help us align what the project vision is. The project vision is the reason for the project to exist. It is a combination of several elements, such as the company's strategic goals, the company tactical goals, the ultimate goal, and the success criteria. The success criteria is composed by all the business goals planned to be attained with the project and the new solution being developed. They should preferably be quantifiable, like for example the increase or decrease of a particular business key performance indicator, that will be affected by the outcome of the project. The ultimate goal, which we have already seen, is usually 1 or 2 objective, yet inspiring sentences, that can be used by the team to make decisions. Remember, the ultimate goal is not the application description. It is the change that this application is supposed to bring to the customer's organization. The company tactical and strategic goals are also preferably quantifiable, and can be something like the number of page visits, or the increase or decrease of a certain business key performance indicator. These goals are often very useful to give context to a project, allowing a much better understanding of its drivers and motivations. Another important section of the vision document is the target users, or the personas. We create personas to represent each of the user types that we expect to interact with our application or system. Then, you can immediately identify the different user roles and personas. The users must be grouped when they use the solution for different purposes, or have different capabilities. Some questions that can help you defining user roles are, for example, are all users from the same department? What other departments may impact this process? How do you control? How do you gather metrics? Then, we can identify the personas. These represent fictitious people who are based on your knowledge of real users. The goal is to bring users to life by developing personas with their own names, usually illustrative of their main role, personalities, motivations, and often even a photo. A persona is meant to further understand a group of related users, so it should describe a background, user needs, related business goals, and its user characteristics or metrics. These user needs will derive the backlog during the project. And remember, users are the starting point for business analysis. Always start with the end users, so we may link back to the value proposition at any point in time. Let's look at this example of a persona. Here, we have a typical recruiter at a recruitment agency. First, we give the persona a name and describe what their role is and how they do it. We then add details about the characteristics and metrics of the persona. Notice that John is one of 200 recruiters across 5 locations. Though he is identified as a frequent user of the application, he does not have a great deal of technical proficiency. We can also establish an age range or other relevant characteristics. Next, we define what are the user needs. User needs are short, high-level descriptions of what the user will require to fulfill his role. In this example, we can see that John needs to keep track of daily objectives, have a clear picture of positions to be filled, and easily register information in the application during phone conversations. Finally, we map the user needs to business goals. This is normally the most challenging part of creating the personas. Business goals should be the ones the user is after or related to. These goals should also be clearly linked to strategic or tactical goals of the company, if not part of the project's success criteria itself. Then, we have the business processes. Here is where the workflows of the application are defined. It's always good to start with the current process, so that we can demonstrate where the improvements are being made, and where efficiencies are gained in delivering the project. When it's a brand new process, mapping out the process will help you to establish the best practice as a visual representation, will help you to quickly identify inefficiencies. We typically start modeling the main business processes or workflows. Modeling the main business process will help break the ice and kick off the discovery process, returning a most needed bird's eye view. This is based on the conversations with the business and stakeholders, to understand what the steps are and how they fit into the business overall. It is here that we should start defining and understanding the user journey. Without this complete picture of the process, it is common to later find missing steps during iteration delivery, and sometimes it may be too late to do anything about it. This step is sometimes also overlooked and not given the importance it deserves. Be visual. Start with a high-level end-to-end workflow, and break it down into component parts where needed, to illustrate the key flows and decision points. This should be done to the main processes. It is not required to do it for every sub-process, especially the really small ones. Detailing all the steps in each process requires user input, since they know the current process best, or what they want the new one to be. Discovering personas with the key users is a good start, but modeling the main processes is crucial for creating a connection with key users, by showing them that you can learn their business and talk their language. The mock-ups are also an important part of the vision document. They will explain how users are going to interact with the product being developed. Mock-ups are a way to show to the end user what the software will look like, without having to build the software or the underlying functionality. Mock-ups can range from very simple hand-drawn screen layouts, to partially functional and interactive user screens. User stories written on top of mock-ups are a lot more grounded on the user's experience, which is what Agile is all about. Then, we have the architecture, a critical part of any OutSystems project. The architecture is designed by the tech lead and is based on the OutSystems architecture canvas. The architecture canvas is an OutSystems architecture tool to make the design of service-oriented architectures more simple. It promotes the correct quality and freedom of reusable services, the correct isolation of distinct functional modules in cases where you are developing and maintaining multiple applications that reuse common modules, and it prepares the applications for scale. Here is a visual representation of a proposed architecture. A well-designed architecture is key to ensuring that we'll be able to evolve and maintain the application easily, over time. If we don't think about it and plan it at the start, we can end up with something that looks like spaghetti. We would have business rules spread over different systems, and code reusability limited and unstructured. We can also end up with system components that are not correctly isolated from each other. So updating the system can have a snowball effect on other systems. This would make it difficult to quickly adapt to business changes, because the system is complex and inflexible. That is why the architecture design is already present from the beginning. At last, we have the epics and user stories. User stories and their structure are what is most important to any agile framework. The same is true for the OutSystems project delivery methodology. If we have to say what are absolute musts in each user story, that would be the three-liner context and the acceptance criteria. The context frames the problem that we are trying to tackle, or the solution that we are trying to deliver for a specific user need. The acceptance criteria are often overlooked, but are actually critical. They detail how the user will interact and experience the solution. Without these two key elements, there is really not much of a user story. Next step is to define the epic structure. They are created using the user needs, business processes, and the mockups. The user needs usually originate a theme. Epics should represent a process step, or closely related functionality or user stories. In the case of a less complex user need, the epics can also be on the first level of the structure. Finally, we have the high-level stories that will give origin to the final user stories during iteration shaping. It is important to ensure that all user needs, business process steps, tasks, or relevant aspects raised by the mockups are all reflected in one or several high-level stories. The epic structure is a good way to organize user stories. It makes it very easy to, from any user story, trace back to its related user need and clearly understand its business value. Note that this is the final level of detail that we usually aim at during initiation. With the exception of those for iteration 1, final user stories are not created or detailed during initiation. Otherwise, it will be very easy to be lost into details, which it is a sure way to not achieve its goals in this very intense week. Well, we covered a lot of topics in this lesson. That is it for this session. Thank you and have a great day.